welcome everybody. My name is Badik and Vice President of ChargeUp Europe, collected, and as well the Chairman of the Board of GreenWay.
Hi everyone, also on my behalf, my name is Sofia, Diakhate, and I'm the CEO of Plugsurfing, the board member as well as the treasurer. Nice to see everyone.
Good afternoon everyone. My name is Axel Horst, I work for Shell. I'm responsible for the e-mobility propositions across all use cases across Europe.
Thank you. By way of introduction, can I ask you to reflect on 2024, which was a little bit complex, right? How you led your companies through, that year, and also maybe if you are comfortable sharing one prediction of 2025.
Oh, sure. An easy question to start with. 2024, since you asked for straight talk, probably was for me like the most challenging year in the over decade that I spent in e-mobility. The most challenging and the longest year as well, because so many things happened. But at the same time, I feel that's probably the year when I grew most as an individual and as a person. But to share a bit as to why I feel it was so challenging, obviously we were faced with the same sort of macro environment and the headwinds that I think most of the people in the industry felt, which also impacted our business customers and the consumers, and then that sort of reflected on us as well. And I feel that was the year when us as Plugsurfing really needed to grow up basically. So probably in the previous decade, there was a lot of experimentation and trying out different things, and we were part of the corporate venture as well. So that was a slightly different environment. But then a couple of years ago, we got acquired by a new company, so there was a change of ownership. So amongst all of that, so happening in the macro environment, we also had a little journey of packing our bags basically from our previous owner, so doing the carve-outs and then doing the carve-in into the new company, and then as I said, having to mature pretty quickly and sort of grow up. So lots of moving pieces, and I suppose one sort of challenging part of that was that we needed to make sure that we also kept our people with us throughout this transition. And that's also something that was challenging, I would say. So shortly I would say challenging, but still probably the year where I feel myself I've also got the most and also grew the most. Shall I go to the prediction, or do we start with the...
Let's go to your prediction.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so in terms of prediction for 2025, I expect that many of the other players in the industry will have to, like those who have not yet done that, probably will have to go through the same journey of sort of maturing and growing up. And by this I mean, showing the profitability. I think that's something that's starting to be expected from many different companies. And I think, I might be wrong, but I feel that we may have been, in that first wave. So I think that the same will have to, like other companies will have to go through the same this year. And when it comes to Plugsurfing, I feel that, thanks to the hard work that we put into this last year, we've sort of positioned ourselves quite well for the growth that we will be seeing, that you have all seen from the State of the Industry reports, of course. So I think that for us at Plugsurfing, this year will be a year where we are able to sort of leverage on the work that we have done last year to set ourselves up for that scaling.
And that will be our first reference. Our first shameless product placement on the State of the Industry report, one of many in the panel.
Yeah. We get 1 point every time we mention the report.
Axel, do you want to share what that was for you?
Yeah, clearly of course 2024 was a great year. No, I mean, let's talk straight talk as well. So I guess it was a great year also for us in terms of we significantly grew volume, we built a lot of sites. But I think I'm not going to share any secrets with the people here that to say that indeed the battery EV vehicle growth indeed significantly declined, and basically most of the industry has been building faster than actually the actual growth of the vehicle park, and we've seen that in utilizations. And so that's been one of the challenges we've seen. Also, part of that we've also been forced to really make choices and say, I guess that's also something for the broader industry. Where do we want to play? Where do we not want to play? And so, for example, in 2024, we did make the decision as Shell to step out of what we call the home and workplace charging, and to further focus our efforts on the public charging, which is where we believe our key sweet spot is. And so, it's about making choices, and in an environment where we've seen indeed the battery vehicle growth not so fast, because I think we found ourselves a bit in a geopolitical storm from many aspects in terms of rising grid fees, member states struggling in terms of how do we invest further in the grid without trying to get all the cost to the consumer, because then actually the economics of your entire energy transition of battery EV might not work anymore. And so, on top of that, also the fact that pushing quite hard on battery EV vehicles might push some further economy out of Europe to the likes of China. And so I guess from European Commission perspective, those are also tough questions there that have been dealing with. And so I guess as an EV charging industry, we find ourselves in the middle of that geopolitical debate as well. But then look to 2025, so I'm a bit of an optimist, and so I do feel that with some of the new policies we see, with the new government in Germany, by the way, we're also getting a new government in the Netherlands at some point, that we will see some new policies that actually will also further rejuvenate, and the battery EV growth will further pick up. And so I think the key for us all will then be about more selective investments, more focus on operational excellence and utilization of our assets, and that will help us all to also achieve better utilization and economics together.
I'm wondering if you share that optimism for 2025, but let's talk first about 2025.
Yeah, I think I absolutely share the view that in 2024 our industry went from adolescence to early adulthood, and I think that's I think seen across all the companies. On our side as well, we saw that the access to capital was complicated, and in 2024, and really those who made it cross the finish line and securing of various kind of debt or equity or this kind of stuff, they probably have a good business plan. It's cleaned up the market, and in the long run, I think it's useful for a number of companies who probably are stressed in year 2024. Well, I was a little bit afraid. A little bit, I would say, disappointed was the debate which we have, for example, with the OEMs, where still this narrative about not having enough charging infrastructure. This was a little bit disappointing for me, because I thought we are already through that, and we don't have to bring this skeleton from. But again, it was there. I mean, we had to fight, and I think as a ChargeUp we will fight well. This is now, I think, much better. If we were going to the numbers from the beginning of the year, it's probably hard to say that the electric vehicles are not sold in Europe because there are some structural problems. We see that the numbers are growing again, so therefore this brings me optimism. Obviously, probably the industry needs a little bit more time of good numbers, or a little bit longer period of the good numbers, to be really becoming again on a positive note. But even if we are becoming on a more positive note, I think we already went through this adolescence to the adulthood, so we will be more mature. So 24 was challenging, but it shaped us, and yeah, I think that's in general, in long run, it's good. And yeah, 2025. If we are not going to bring again these discussions about the long-term CO2 standard targets, and if some companies are not going to try to downplay this, then I think it will be positive. I get the feeling that it's still very much about feelings, about emotions, how the market behave. Yeah? It's not still like, let's look on the real underlying trends, but but it's about what kind of messages is someone putting into the news media and so on and so forth. So if we all believe that and we will communicate all, and all, I don't mean only ChargeUp Europe, I mean all sector, including car industry, are going to communicate in better electric vehicles are the way forward, I think it will be optimistic here. If we are again start to question this, again we will have a headwind. So
thank you. A question that is not a softball question at all, which is about utilization, right? And so you mentioned profitability, Sofia, how that's a theme for everyone. You mentioned the CO2 standards for cars, and how that could affect EV uptake, which of course we do not want. The other question behind is how do we crack that sink between EV charging infrastructure and EV uptake? How do we ensure that this rollout is well synced between two sectors who, well, haven't necessarily collaborated, in the past, or new, right? While still making sure to increase also the consumer confidence at the same time.
Share some first thoughts on that. So, I guess of course we all know the AFIR regulation, and I think there is indeed a time in the industry where you need to push a certain minimum kind of level of infrastructure, which I think AFIR has done, and is I think needed for specific geographies to solve the chicken and egg problem, if you like. But of course we also have seen that we've now actually by far surpassed many of the AFIR requirements, and we're even getting to a point indeed where, as I said before, it could be a bit of an overbuild compared to the current battery EV development of the vehicle park. So therefore, I believe we need to be a bit careful with additional regulations that say we need to maybe build even more as a regulation, or we need to, for example, have building regulations to mandatory build more, because the more you put those regulations in, the more you force industry to build infrastructure where they will have low utilization. And so from our perspective, it's about, okay, maybe on a minimum level, you need a regulation to get it going, and I think in most of the West European countries we're far beyond that now. And after that, you really need to leave it to the market and make sure that the investments are happening where the market believes it's going to be profitable. And that is the best way, I think, for having that sync. In addition to, we already mentioned that kind of the cooperation with the auto OEMs. Indeed, we might not always be completely aligned in interest, but I do also believe there's a lot of common ground we have together with the auto OEMs. And so, if we play that game a bit smartly, I think we can also make it a more positive discussion and really drive that together as well.
And of course also a lot about the collaboration and the dialogue between the OEM car manufacturers and the charging industry, which we are doing to ensure that we sort of have the same message towards the drivers and the consumers. There's one member who gave us a good example, I think a few months ago, about where you had sort of two associations, I think the other one saying there's not enough cars, the other one saying there's not enough chargers, and then he said that basically what the consumer retained was that, well, not enough cars, not enough chargers, so e-mobility is not really something for today. So just perhaps to emphasize that we need to continue to having those conversations and that dialogue to make sure that where possible we have a united front towards the consumers as well, and to keep on producing great reports that bring confidence, such as the State of the Industry reports, that bring confidence to the different stakeholders, but also to the consumers to see the volume of public chargers that are already out there, for instance.
Well, if specifically looking at the public charging, I think there is a period where you increase or you need to secure the regional distribution. So you need to have a coverage and making sure that there is a charger nearby. And I think the key message, and then there is a second stage where basically you have a coverage and you are increasing the density, so you are putting more chargers on the same street or more chargers on the same hub and this kind of stuff. And I think what is quite critical that we put out the message that we already reach, I would say almost fully, the geographical coverage. Yeah, so that really shouldn't be a problem. Okay, I can admit that there are maybe some very specific parts with a low population and the low transit and so on and so forth, right, where still some charges needs to be done. But it's now we are past this, the geographical coverage is there. We are now to increase density, but this needs to be left to the companies. because we know how to deploy capital. We know when we can put additional charger. We know where it can make sense from the economical perspective. And we as well know when we are able to activate funding for that. And there is no way to push us to do it earlier because our CFO or our investors don't give us money for that.
And that's a perfect transition, Peter. Thank you for making my job so easy. To a question about finance. All right, so business models, at least for the EV public EV charging sector, are essentially premised on the availability of EVs on the market, because then that will drive utilization, drive revenues. And then our investors are precious to us, look to the numbers to see if we are invested, essentially, right? So how do we maintain our attractiveness to private capital in the current market conditions, in the current noise of, well, negativity or mobility, to put it simply? How do we keep investors on our side?
It's a good question. I had to answer it last year many times. I think the first thing is that you need to convince them that you know what you're doing. So you are doing it in a structured way, you are doing it in a professional way, you are not a daydreamer, but you are realistically, you have the vision, but you have an Excel sheet. So that's number one. And number two is the stability. And we all know that the EV charging is investment for a very long period of time. We have chargers, maybe will live 10 years, but we are digging the cables into the ground for 40 years, building the transformer stations which are going to be there tens of years. So they need, the capital needs to be some kind of assurance that in the long run it's going to be good. So, and then if you combine it, if you have someone who is able to execute in a professional way, and at the same time you have long-term stability, then they are quite assured that they are fine to deploy capital. I don't think that Europe has a shortage of capital to be invested. I don't think so. There is a lot of money that can be deployed, but we need to have these two conditions met. The first condition is on companies. The second condition is mostly on the public sector and providing that kind of a long-term visibility.
How much do you think they are perceiving of the political discussion, the political conversations around the CO2 standards forecast? How much do you think that's something that they following closely, observing?
Very closely.
But perhaps I can just add a bit on what you said, Peter, on sort of executing in a professional way. I believe that to be a key thing, especially now that we're seeing this transition in mobility that's perhaps started, a couple of years ago, a year ago. So, and I don't really have experiences myself of sort of discussing with the investors, but I would just assume that meeting a team who they believe can actually evolve and mature together with the industry might be something that is important to them in order to sort of feel that they're betting on the right horse. Because as we discussed a couple of months ago, potentially the teams that we had 10 years ago, don't have the skill set needed, to manage and navigate the e-mobility that we're seeing today and will be seeing in the next few years. So potentially even more of a focus on the people, I would say.
Do you want to, just for the benefit of the broader audience, do you want to give a quick summary of the discussion that we had with the board around mostly focusing that transition?
I could, if I had managed to come because my flight got cancelled. So yeah. Okay, but I mean, were you in there? Do you want to give a quick update on that?
I need to recall it. Just give me a time.
No, but I think if you just take a bit of a business hat on, so I think if you go back 10 years, it was an industry with a lot of very good willing people who are pioneering and building this industry and building this e-mobility future together. And also, shortly thereafter, a lot of venture capitalists putting a lot of money in with very low interest rates, expecting that this would be like gold dust. And I think there is a bit of a matter of sense of reality now to say, okay, indeed, digitalization is not that easy to make money in this industry. And then I think it becomes the cold hard game of reducing cost and building skill. And I think that will also have its impact on the industry. No doubt. I mean, I think it's really about really scanning through your P&L and say, okay, what kind of cost can I further take out? How can I build further scale? how can I make the operational excellence go better? Because indeed we still see many areas where we see charging success rate also suboptimal, and of course that's not helping your top line if your customers are not able to charge. And so there are a lot of things still happening to be done on the operational excellence side and the cost side, the economies of scale. So for me it's a bit of a sobering time maybe in the industry, but also a sign of a maturing industry that I think we're now also becoming.
I see you nodding, Sofia, do you agree with that?
No, I don't, that's fine. No, I completely agree, and at least for us as Plugsurfing, so I feel that the change happened almost overnight, and that's what I was alluding to earlier today. So perhaps some of the members, will go through this at a slower pace or a bit later, but from our perspective, I think it was a combination of what was happening in the external environment and the change of ownership. So I feel that had to happen. Sort of the growing up part of things had to happen quite rapidly. Going back to people, I think that one of the challenges was that when something happens that quickly, you just need to make sure that you keep your people with you, so that you don't sort of walk for a while and then turn around and don't see anyone there anymore. So I think it is happening, perhaps at a different pace, depending on the company, but I think it's definitely happening.
Sofia, we're going to stay with you. So one of the hardest things I have to do is to explain MSPs to policymakers. What is that? MSPs. How, and maybe also, Axel, you can come in on that one. How do MSPs want to be positioned in the future in that value chain?
Yeah, you can go first, and you steal my thunder, that's fine. I was happy to go first, so there I think we have a lot of MSPs, we have a lot of mom and pop MSPs out there, and sometimes I'm wondering how many MSPs I'm allowing on my network and what kind of volume they're really bringing. And so I think there is a piece there around more kind of commercial strategy there as well, in terms of how do we have that relationship between CPO and MSP and have also a commercial mature conversation about volume that people are bringing, and that's one area. The interesting thing for MSP also is, of course, we see more regulations for the high-speed chargers to now accept B2C payment mechanisms, other kind of mechanisms. So you could see that could also maybe bring a threat for some of the MSP models. So indeed, as MSP, again, it's about having that scale and being able to also add maybe additional services other than just being a payment mechanism. So for me, a successful MSP is indeed one that also brings additional services, great coverage, a great deal, loyalty, great payment mechanisms, all of that. For us, I mean, MSP, we are kind of by nature an MSP company because we basically came from the fuel business in terms of the Shell card with kind of, that is the MSP, that is kind of the center of our universe where we work with B2B customers to give them all they need. So for us, moving that to the MSP was for us a very natural move. That is the only way basically we believe we should have a working B2B business and then on top of that a great B2C offer. But I do think indeed there are some clouds on the horizon for many of the MSPs, and it's really about having a very competitive offer and an offer that will continuously lock in customers and have a very user-friendly experience.
And for us, I would say that we want to be seen as the go-to partner for powering the future of EV charging for businesses and for drivers. And what that means is, yes, great coverage, so access to a large coverage, but we put a lot of attention and efforts into the quality side of things as well. So we don't want to be perceived simply as someone who sort of connects drivers to chargers without doing anything in between. We have a big team working very hard to add added value basically in the middle, so that it's not only about quantity but it's also about quality. Quality referring to data, best possible prices, for instance, for drivers and so on. So yes, it's all about the network and getting access to that, but we really want to sort of be adding that quality stamp and saying that, because of us, we managed to make paying simpler and sort of have the users have better experiences and at the best possible prices as well.
Sofia, just to make that, can you make that even more concrete? So of course we have a lot of members of ChargeUp in the room. Yeah, we know what an MSP is. We also have people online who may be a little bit less familiar. In terms of services you're developing, what does that look like? The actual value that you're bringing, can you just make that a little bit more tangible?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I have a lot of appreciation for everything that happens before the EMSP steps in, because I've also spent some time, in the CPO business and asset, ownership and back-end system licensing and so on. And same as Axel actually said, we also had to, in the past couple of years, also sort of get more focused, sort of have a more focused strategy. So we did also exit one of the segments that we had been in for the past 10 years. But so today we're focusing on being an EMSP, and perhaps it sounds like something that's very simple and not much going on around there, but it starts from having a team of people going around talking to different CPOs and sort of discussing the potential for roaming, negotiating those contracts, and that can take months at times, signing those deals, and once that's done, then we do the technical integration between the CPO and the EMSP. Then we make sure that the data flows back and forth correctly, so that the end users or drivers have that reliability and uptime that we talk so much about. Make sure that the prices that are flowing through between the CPO and the EMSP are actually correct. So you would be surprised how often it's not. And we, part of what I said about having that quality stamp, it is checking those prices on a very, very detailed level to make sure that whatever is agreed between ourselves and the CPO is actually what comes across in that invoice. So we check invoices on the CDR level. So every time there's something, then we will engage in discussions with the CPO and together solve industry problems as well. Because we are, learning as we go and maturing together. But then there's obviously the end user interface or the app. A lot of work goes into that, and since the industry is evolving, you can't have one app and not do anything with it, for a few years. It's like a constant work and research to make sure that we keep up with what the drivers need, and that we are able to sort of further simplify that process for the drivers. Then there's customer support, then there's a lot of things that goes into doing that, processing all of the payments, and so there's a lot of work that goes on in the background, but we don't want to have that be visible, and that's sort of the value proposition of Plugsurfing. So we worry about that so that others can focus on other things.
In the press briefing we just had, you were explaining that it's nice if we are invisible, essentially.
Exactly, and I don't know how many people here agree. We talked about it a bit with Peter as well. Like, I don't think that anyone else really cares about EV charging outside of the people in this room and perhaps online. Like, we wake up every day thinking about EV charging, and then perhaps at times, we make the mistake of thinking that, surely every other consumer also thinks about EV charging 10 hours a day. Which I don't believe is true. So consumers just want to get from one place to the other. They don't want to spend a few hours thinking about, do I have enough of a charge? Where will I find the charger? Will it work? How long will I have to stay there for? And will the pricing be fair and correct? And no, that's just something that needs to happen without them spending any capacity thinking about charging.
Yeah. We shouldn't be a bottleneck, and we shouldn't be seen. That's the point. Everything should go smoothly, and don't think about that too much about it.
Do you think we will progress?
Yeah, for sure. I think, and it's inevitable, because as we are growing, we cannot afford to make a lot of mistakes, because if you do a lot of mistakes on 1,000 customers, and then it's a certain number of issues per day, but if you do a lot of mistakes on 100,000 customers, then then basically you are just solving the problems all the way long. So I think it's necessary, and basically without improving the smoothness and without improving the reliability, which means basically that we are not seeing as everything goes smoothly, it's not possible to survive.
Our new ambition to be invisible. So this year we are very excited because there's one good thing that will come out of the Commission, and we know that, which is a proposal to green corporate fleets. And we think that's good because we hope it will improve EV demand. And we want that, right? We want to see improved revenues, we want to see more EVs. Staying on the side of EV charging, what role do fleets and fleet contracts play with companies in being a business center for EV charging?
Yeah,
Go for it, Axel.
happy to take that. I mean, I can probably talk about fleets for hours because that was actually my previous role in Shell to be looking after the fleet propositions across Europe, across all of our fuel types. But I think the fleets are quite interesting because if you focus on different types of corporate fleets, when you start with the passenger car and the company cars that people drive in, they're actually the forefront of decarbonization in many countries, often driven, of course, by fiscal incentives. And a great example now is Belgium, where basically all new company cars as of 2026 need to be full EV in order to still be eligible for the fiscal benefits. And also in a country like Belgium, where the company car is a very common benefit, and where I think 60-70% of all cars are company cars, that is a profound impact on the growth of battery EV and therefore demand in the country. And so that's clearly how important that is from that corporate fleet perspective. If you then zoom in on the other corporate fleets, so then you look at, for example, light-duty vehicles, then it already gets a bit complicated, because then it's about, okay, what's my total cost of ownership, what's the weight restrictions for this vehicle, how much can I take with me? And if you then also look at light-duty vehicles used by kind of small, medium enterprise businesses, then yes, it's about total cost of ownership, but also about the purchase price. And so can they afford actually to indeed switch to a battery EV kind of light-duty vehicle? And if you then get to a heavy-duty vehicle, it gets even more interesting because again, it's a total cost of ownership play, but new battery EV trucks are quite expensive. And then it's really about looking at the entire value chain, because just the commercial road transport company in itself cannot afford to do that unless you can translate that into the price of the broader value chain. And so this needs to work in a broader value chain that appreciate the value of a CO2 neutral supply chain, basically. So there you clearly see good commercial road transport companies that can translate this to their customers and can sell them kind of a CO2 neutral supply chain. They are going to be successful in this space, and they are starting to invest in their e-depots and semi-public depots, and they are the ones we can support with public charging for heavy-duty vehicles along the way. But you also see some smaller commercial road transport companies, and they can clearly not square the numbers just yet. They just say, well, it's unaffordable. I will continue to drive diesel for as long as I can afford it, because there's no other way I can see how I can make it work with these EV heavy-duty vehicles. So that's quite an interesting game to be played on the corporate fleet part, I must say. But for us, it's always been a core part of our business, and so for us, quite interesting to see how we help customers afford that on their road to CO2 neutral.
And yeah, not much to add to that, but fleets are very important to us as well as co-pay, even more so than as Plugsurfing. But as Plugsurfing, we power, for instance, Shovelcar and All-Star, which might be brands that you're familiar with, where fleets will be more important. But yeah, definitely they play an important role in our business as well.
Maybe what I would add about the fleets is that full support of it is very critical, but as well when we see that for the fleets, actually the charging is one of the biggest headache, so to speak, because it's so different to the vehicles, especially if they want to charge it in their premises, if they want to charge at the home of their employees, and so all new use cases of new situations and coming up. So from the car perspective, the car is more or less the same. There is not a big issue, but when it comes to charging, that's actually something which is causing the headache, not only to the fleet manager, but also to the facility manager, to accountants, to controlling departments. So I think here we need to play a very important role in making sure that the fleets are not worried about the transition to the electric vehicles. It's very often part of the ESG strategies, but what I observe that sometimes the electrification is the last one. They would rather build the solar roof and whatever ESG strategy can do before they move into the electrification, because it's every department is affected. As I said, fleet management, facility management, accounting, controlling, HR. So we as a provider of charging, we should make them as easy as possible.
One of the main findings, or one of the findings that is of the state of the industry, is that fast charging has progressed very quickly in the past years. For the moment, I want to focus a bit on AC, private charging. How do you see that fitting into the equation? How should it be valued more broadly? Instance, AC, private charging.
Yeah, I can only say one thing. We are more focused on the public charging, but I have my personal feeling that we do not pay enough attention there. I mean, as an industry, there are definitely companies doing it, focusing on it. But considering that number of times I'm hearing that 80% of the charging or 80% of the electricity is going to the private charging, and I have the feeling that we are not as an industry focusing on that, and maybe that could be actually a bigger bottleneck for rollout of electric vehicles than public charging. If the people will be able to build AC chargers in their home because of for example, fire safety issues, if the EPBD will be really properly implemented. So I'm a little bit worried about this field.
I think it's a key field, even though I just said that we're stepping out of home workplace charging, so that sounds maybe a bit contradictory. But it's also all about focus, so remember that. No, but to be serious, indeed what we see actually in this brilliant state of the industry report, that I already mentioned that, is indeed we see the vast majority of chargers are of course private chargers, and indeed that proportion will stay like that towards 2035. But if you then actually look at the kilowatt hours or terawatt hours, I mean that will of course move proportionally much more to public charging. And why is that? Because basically how it started out with EV charging is maybe more affluent customer having an EV car, more likely to have a driveway. But once it's getting more ubiquitous, everybody will be getting a battery EV vehicle as far as we're concerned. Then many people will have one that do not have access to their own driveway charging, and therefore are relying on either workplace charging or indeed public charging. So it's logical that piece will become more important. Also, but this is a bit my own prediction, but you have seen, of course, over time, batteries increasing in size, but I think we're probably reaching a bit of a sweet spot, and I think the OEMs are also realizing, because the bigger you make it, you might say it's bigger kind of radius, but at some point, you've hit that sweet spot, and to make it even larger, it gets even more expensive, even heavier. So I think you get to a point where batteries will not necessarily increase further, particularly as you see more smaller cars now getting also battery EV.
And so on. So I think we will continue to see a mix depending on the use case.
Axel, you were just mentioning flexibility. What role do we see for flexibility, for demand response, great flexibility services? What are your perspectives on this very fast topic?
Looking be there, Sofia, but no, but I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think many of the very intelligent people in this room probably know more about this than I do. But I do think, as mentioned, the grid flexibility will become more and more important. You'll see now already that in many areas you see that grid operators try to disencourage people from using the grid between, let's say, 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. which is the time where people come home, they connect their EV, and they start cooking with their induction cooking plate, etc. And that's causing a big peak. So that is a clear case where you can say, okay, with already some smart charging, you can kind of start to shave that peak. And one step further, you can think about indeed bringing the battery kind of power back to the grid. But of course, that does sound easy, but of course it's technical challenges, but also taxation challenges in terms of double taxation. Maybe you need to pay additional VAT by selling the same kilowatt hours back to the grid, Or what happens when maybe your employee is happily charging at your workplace and then selling it back to the grid at home. And so you might have some interesting use cases there, which are maybe collateral damage in that strategy. So there are some things to be solved there for that to work. But also, if I then maybe make the bridge to public AC charging, like for example we have with Electricity. Already today in London we have a so-called smart charging offer, where basically a customer can choose, okay, for a reduced price, I give a smart charging option, which basically means that we can switch on and off the charging during the night at a time that helps the grid operator, and thereby we can also encourage the user, because they will get a lower price in return for that. The car will still be fully charged the next morning, but indeed it allows us flexibility, and we can then translate that also back to a better customer price. So it doesn't always have to be super complicated dynamic pricing. It sometimes can be as easy as a lower price in exchange for some smart charging, kind of switching on and off functionality. So I think we're going to see more and more of that as well, and therefore I think we can play increasingly a positive role to the grids, rather than a kind of a peak role that we're currently still playing to the grids.
I think when it comes to flexibility, flexibility is not only one thing. You have many various types of flexibility which you can have in charging, and basically it matters on. It's very simple. At the end, it will work if it brings economic benefits to the players. And I can give you an example. For example, we have some charging hubs where we pay the reserve capacity, and we can play with this every month. We can change it, and we already see that there are months where we need more capacity, and in other months because there is a kind of a seasonality, more demand in summer, for example. Then we reduce the reserve capacity in a month where we know that the demand is not going to be such big. And this is bringing hundreds of euro per one location, so it pays off for the operator to spend time with that, spend FTE on that, or have a system for that. And there are other use cases with the flexibility where it's still not there. Basically, they are not on such a volume where the effort will pay off. And I think in this respect, we are rational economic players. So as soon as there will be a business case for the operator to use the flexibility, they will do it, no doubt. But we should not forget that our primary role is to get people from A to B, so charge them. And this always needs to be the first thing. So if we manage to do this, and if the flexibility of various kind of flexibilities can bring us the revenues which are bigger than the cost, that we are definitely going to do that. I think what we need to have this like a pragmatic approach on here and now, on today. On the other side, we shouldn't lose the vision that charging is actually a bridge between the energy sector and transportation. So we need to make sure, and we had very good debate today on the board about that we are positioned in this crossroads, because definitely there are use cases, and there are business models, and there are things which can make money for us or charging cheaper for our customers. But we need to be well positioned, even despite the fact that at the moment we don't see immediate business case right now.
In case I wasn't clear, you just raised the rest of the industry. You all had to read it because you just did a kind of thing on it. Was there a particular fact, data point, case study, development of your own case study that struck you from the report when you went through it?
Yeah, I mean, many of the data points, of course, but perhaps just very briefly on that flexibility. I think in terms of use cases, I like the one that spoke to this and also basically brought the perspective of how flexibility can support increasing the amount of renewable energy used in the system. So I think that's a good angle to keep in mind. But in terms of data points, the obvious ones for Plugsurfing, being the number of public charge points, so 950,000, if we are to believe, which we do, the state of the industry reports. And I was also reflecting on this earlier today. So when you think about the times 15 years ago, we were talking about a few potentially, and then going to close to 1 million and then going to 3.8 million in 10 years. Like, that's a massive amount. So that's, and obviously we look at those numbers as well as Plugsurfing, but when you're faced with them, you see that, you know, in front of you, you really realize, well, first, and now is the time that we need to be making sure that the processes and the tools are sort of set up for those volumes, to be able to cope with all of that. Perhaps one more would be the electricity consumption of EVs. So 0.6% at the moment, which seems very small, but then also in 10 years time, it's expected to go to 3.8%, which still feels very small to me. You know, not my area of expertise, but I would have expected for that to be but clearly bigger number.
Yeah, I feel that a lot. Are you going to break the grid? Yeah, you're not going to break the grid. Axel,
No, we're not going to break the grid, but we can maybe help the grid. The number that I think that stuck with me most, I think, you talk about the number of, let's say, almost 1 million of public charging points we have in Europe, but the staggering number already today, I think we have around 9 million private charging points. So that's also a huge number. And so often you hear the OEMs about, indeed, complaining maybe about insufficient coverage, which, by the way, as Peter already articulated well, is actually not correct, but usually also discounting the fact that we've got another 9 million of private charging points heavily in use, where actually at this moment the vast amount of charging happens. But then, as I mentioned before, what we then see is it will grow, I think, to probably 40 million charge points in total, where the proportion, of course, of private charging will still be the highest, but as I mentioned, the volume of the chargers will much more go to public as well. So that will then take at least 50%. So a huge growth in number of chargers, but in terms of the development of where the kilowatt hours are going, it's going to be proportionally also moving further to public charging. So some pretty staggering numbers there that stuck with me.
So if I can mention one thing, is what strikes me was the number of people working in this industry in the broadest spectrum of the companies. I think you mentioned a number of 58,000 people working in the industry today. So that's something which is, I think, really interesting. I wouldn't say it before, but what I think overall strikes me the most is a kind of a feeling when I read that how mature we are already as an industry, and I think that it's not a common perception. I still have the feeling when I talk with people from other industries that we are this kind of a bunch of startups building something with around the roots with the cables, and I think the state of industry really is showing, and I think we can be healthy self-confident about where we are as an industry. And I know we always say there are big car manufacturers, there are MNGs, and we have the small guys around. But I feel that it's not the case anymore, and we are becoming mature, and we are becoming a critical industry. And the state of the industry report shows that, I think, very well. So that's something which strikes me.
Let's in that positive spirit and conclude with one question, and then we open to everyone in the room. What, in your view, is the best asset or the strongest proposition of our sector today? How do you do that?
You want to go first? Well, I do think, of course, we do complain a lot about charging success rate. I do that often. But at the same time, I do think it's quite mind-blowing. You think about it. There are 1 million chargers across Europe, and they all talk more or less the same language. And we can utilize them with one MSP. I mean, we have achieved a lot as an industry. Of course, we are focusing, of course, always on the next step. But I think what we've already achieved, what we've already put in the ground, and how it's all working together and safely, I think that's a remarkable achievement for an industry that is still a bit in its infancy. It's for me, it's always great to work with the teams. As mentioned, there are many people in this industry who are truly, really intrinsically driven by the energy transition and doing the right thing for the planet. And so for me, it's a really great way of working with such a well-motivated team. So I think we've really accomplished a lot already together.
Yeah, and I mean, I was also sort of mentioning this in the previous sessions. When I was looking at the reports, I was sort of half emotional as looking at the numbers, and I really sort of stopped to think about how far we've come, and sort of I think we should be really proud of ourselves. We don't need to go sort of that many years, back where we didn't have chargers, we didn't have all these different roles and people, 58,000, not even close, 10 years ago. So I think we need to remember to keep that in mind, amidst the headwinds and the challenges and this and that. Let's stop to think about what we have achieved in these years. That's really amazing, and that would not have happened without those dedicated people who really, want to save the planet and want to take things forward. So I would say, supporting green transition as well, but I would also like perhaps to, wish and emphasize the role that us as Europe can play in e-mobility as well, as something that we could sort of leverage on it and continue to be proud of, and make sure that happens, that we stay at the forefront of the industry.
I would repeat if I say the same things, but maybe let's consider that everything this is happening in Europe, in diversified Europe, with 28 member states. And actually our industry, I think, is a good example that things can work across Europe. I don't think that there is significantly different user experience if you do it in south or north or west or east. There are bigger countries where it works much worse, I think, not mentioning US directly. And but yeah, I think this is for me kind of a sign that actually responds to the huge diversity which we have in Europe. It is almost the one single industry working smoothly across the borders.
We have a few minutes to take questions from the audience. Who would like to address our board members?
Thanks. Nice to be back, guys, and to hear your feedback on the State of the Industry Report. The question I would have is there anything missing in the State of the Industry Report that you would like to see addressed in maybe next year's version? The thing I was hoping to see more of is we are moving from a EV environment where company cars were driving sales to more of a healthier market where a lot more rational buyers are now driving EVs. And I think price of charging is going to be a big topic, especially compared to liquid fuels. And I was wondering whether or not we could do more to make the case for EV, the way it's taxed, vis-a-vis other fuels, so fuel neutrality. Is that an area you think we should dive into more?
Yeah, as you can mention, in industry I'm in, that's one of my hobby horses. Looking at overall, I would say the CO2 pricing of different forms of energy. So I strongly agree with the argument there. I think fundamentally we're actually getting, seems a bit in the wrong direction, where we see increasing network grid fees. We see a lot of investment still need to be done in the entire infrastructure on kind of both mid and high power and all the offshore wind parks and how they are connected. It's all driving up the investment. And if you try to translate that to the users, and if you give an exemption to the industry, who's going to pay for it? It's going to be the consumer. And if you then start to compare on a variable basis, indeed, your kilowatt hour versus the comparable liter of fuel you need, it might go the wrong direction. And that's of course a very bad thing, that will not help in the transition, because the consumer will say, okay, that's not working for me. I mean, I like to save the planet, but not if it's really costing me money. Yeah, that's how many consumers unfortunately still also think, but indeed without being too cynical, it needs to be a just energy transition, it needs to be affordable for people. And so I think you make a great point, and something we are actually including our advocacy also on Euro Commission level. We've been discussing this with Horst, with Dan Jurgensen, exactly this topic, how to make it an affordable energy transition, because that is the best incentive for people to see, okay, it's actually the best way of driving is the most affordable way of driving. Clearly there are a lot of underlying factors there, so we need to talk about the grid fees. We also talk about some of the geopolitical pieces there around the entire battery supply chain and who controls most of that. And guess what, it's not Europe. And so how can we push that harder without actually driving the industry out of Europe? And so I think you touched on a good subject, and I think it's really about working this with the Commission, but also with the OEMs in a productive way, so really say, where do we have actually common ground together? Because obviously all of us want to make EV charging more affordable, and rather than maybe pushing each other a bit like, yeah, you don't have the cars, yeah, but you don't have the infrastructure, if we have these messages for the consumer, what is the consumer supposed to think if they see these messages? So let's work on some positive common ground, and the enemy is outside. And so let's work with that and see how we work with the proper taxation and pricing of kilowatt hours, also versus fossil fuels, to make sure the underlying incentive is in the right direction. So I wholeheartedly agree with you there, and I think it's something we could also maybe spend a bit more time on to clarify how we do this in our advocacy.
And I think, Peter, you had a comment earlier today about something that you feel we could do better or differently in the next report in terms of.
That was the regarding the data which we provide, and I think this internal comment that we need to spend a little bit more time with the data which we provide, making 100% sure that they are correct, because I think the ChargeUp Europe should be the association where the people go for the best information about the charging industry. That's what I want to say. But regarding the prices, I think that's something which we can expect this year is going to be a big topic. Probably we as an industry are going to be attacked on that field about the prices, about price transparency. We have inherently complex topics with that, because obviously the EV charging is priced differently in your local home premises and on the fast charging. Not all people already understand that, and there needs to be a different prices between these different use cases. It's much more complex in this respect than just normal oil and gas. So there are a lot of things which still need to explain, and we will need to explain. I think we will be forced to explain this year, as probably the policymakers will be putting us in hard questions about why the high power charging is such priced, and there are different prices for something else. Why there are differences between the countries? That will be a topic.
Yeah, and on pricing, of course, we talked about the role of the EMSP, and I mentioned already that one sort of core responsibility, let's say, or activity for Plugsurfing is to go and negotiate the best deals possible with CPO, so that we're able to offer affordable prices to the drivers. But then the other side of the coin is that it's not sufficient to have the best deal. It also needs to be communicated in a way that the customer and the driver actually understands, so that they don't have surprises, once the charge is done. So it's about the actual pricing level, but also price transparency, and just simplifying that, so that there are no nasty surprises.
Hi, good afternoon everyone. My name is Julia Hildame. I work for Regulatory Assistance Project, ChargeUp. We are a group of policy advisors in clean energy transition topics, and I lead our transport work. So we are right in between the energy and the transport sector. Hence, my question or comment on your excellent points on smart charging. I think that would be really key to bring the cost down, both for the industry, but also then for the consumers, in all use cases, both that charge privately but also public. So I just wanted to add, let's say, a message to what you've already said, because there's one sort of essential condition to allow, let's say, smart charging to really become the default standard setting for all type of charging, and that's time-varying network pricing. That's basically the pricing for using the power networks. So what you pay your grid operator when you offer a charging service. Because it's no coincidence, of course, that Ubitricity can offer interesting lower prices in exchange for some adaptive charging overnight, because London, Greater London area, has this type of network pricing in place. In other countries, as we know, it's much more difficult. Why am I mentioning that? Because you have a huge opportunity this year to basically push for this on EU level and of course with energy regulators in member states. Why is that? Because the Commission will issue guidance on pricing in about 1 month time. We have other initiatives such as the Electrification Action Plan and the grid package ahead. So combined with more discussion on pricing, I think it's also an excellent time to talk about tariffs that help smart charging. And then combined with that, there's an ask from us. We would like all consumers to see this time varying pricing at the charging point, including those that are relying on public charging. Because why would they miss out on a saving just because they're relying on public charging? For now, we've mapped this out across Europe. Not every consumer in Europe has the same offer, the same choice. On smart tariffs, Northern Europe, Northeastern Europe, they're very much used to adapt to their consumption. South, Southwest, Southeast doesn't look that great. Doesn't sound exactly fair to me. That's an excellent point that you can raise at European level. So I think with that, perhaps combine the question, do you have any strategies in mind on how to sort of equalize that offer, let's say make it available for all types of consumers in all countries?
No, great comment, and I couldn't agree more. And indeed, I shared the UB example, indeed in London, and indeed, as you rightfully point out, that's because there is an underlying tariff structure that enables that. As you probably know, we're also working with the MRAE in the Netherlands with some pilots on that. But there are a couple of snags to deal with. So there's some technical part, there is indeed a part around, indeed, are those differentiated tariffs in place? But it's also about, does OCPP standard allow you to come up with different pricing structures? Particularly with roaming, it could be quite complicated. So there's also a few standards that we need to work on to make sure that there's more flexibility possible to do smart charging also through roaming agreements. And so, for example, where we do this now, we actually do it with MRAE on a pilot using a simple B2C payment mechanism or a QR code payment portal. We can't do it yet through some of the roaming interfaces. So fully agree, and I think the role we can play is maybe to push that hard with some of the standardization work that we're actually already doing a lot of advocacy on in terms of further development of standards that allow that more flexible pricing. The only piece in the background of my mind, which is I think the point that Sofia mentioned, it could make it even more complicated to customers because the price you pay is like depending on the charge point, the MSP, and the time of day, and the smart charging, yes or no, and maybe even the state of charge. So there are some great initiatives here, but it also needs to be really simple to understand for the customer to say, this is a great deal, I'm going to go for smart charging, and then I have the best deal and I choose that. So fully agree, I think there's a great role we should play there in policy advocacy and standards development.
And perhaps to add just a bit to what you said about sort of price transparency, another data point from the report is that still the majority of the people charge through an MSP contract, and then also using the RFID key. So when you use that, then it's perhaps even more complicated to make sure that the price is visible to the driver when they start that charge.
Yeah, and if I can say for someone who's running public charging, it's to a large extent DC charging is maybe it's because of our size, but we are not there yet where we can say, okay, we can provide something which will be reliable and which will be working for the customers. And if we talk about the dynamic pricing on the public charging, which would really bring a significant economic benefit. So I'm a little bit worried that maybe for some companies which are much larger than we are, it's already there. But for us, maintaining the system and making it properly work 99% of the time, making it in a way that people are not confused, that basically all of a sudden they pay more, so it must be well communicated. It's a really not easy way, and we at the moment really do not see the business case that there at this very moment. That's what I can say for us as a group.
Hi, I'm Katy Krivkova. I'm a product lawyer from Old EVBox. Let me look at this one. I have a question related to the new or upcoming regulations on cybersecurity and the connected devices. So now the manufacturers and also connected to that CPOs and backends to some extent, they should be ready to maintain products for the lifetime, meaning also providing updates, etc. And lifetime of chargers, I imagine. So 2 years, right? So my question is, I have 3 small connected questions. One is, do you think companies are ready to do that? Do you think they're aware, and especially manufacturers? Maybe also linked to Peter's comment that sometimes it's even challenging to convince investors that it's a long-term investment. Look at these coming regulations. So that would be one question. Second question, do you think industry as a whole is ready to do it? Because it's one thing, one company is ready, it's another thing how we are all, the whole interoperability, and also speaking from the experience, sometimes the companies go out of market, right? And the last question, do you think there is space for more standardization looking at these future requirements?
So if I understood correctly, the question is if we think that a producer of the charge are able to guarantee that they will provide update for lifetime of the charger, which basically is 10 years plus. Probably a producer being on the CPO side, that's something which we will require, and we at least require in legal contracts which we have with the suppliers. For, as you said, sometimes it doesn't have to be enough if the supplier goes out of the market. But yes, for us it's critical not only for security, but basically because of the basic operation. And this is maybe that's one of the reasons why basically there are not so many suppliers on the market actually, because if you look especially on the DC world in Europe, the number of suppliers are really quite limited. If you look on the top, 90% of the charging infrastructure is delivered. I don't have the number in my mind, but I think 90% of charging infrastructure is delivered by 5 suppliers. And maybe one of the reasons is because the CPOs just want to make a safe bet on someone who believe he will be here in 10 years' time.
Yeah, maybe just 2 thoughts on that. I mean, first of all, I'm all in favor indeed of further increasing the security of the payment system surrounding EV at the moment. I mean, I think it's relatively straightforward, maybe a bit too straightforward, and when it gets even larger scale, then of course the criminals will start to focus more and more on it as well. And then you need to think about, okay, could there be different type of authentication, particularly if you start to use your RFID or your keycard code. And indeed that then also requires for the manufacturers to indeed have ongoing updates. There is, however, in the back of my mind also a piece around, okay, we should also be a bit careful of putting a lot of additional regulations on, because at the same, I see the cybersecurity piece, I see the ongoing interoperability piece, I see the piece around plug-in charge, etc. But at the end of the day, it all needs to be developed, guys, by these these manufacturers. They need to support that, and at the end of the day, the CPOs will pay for it, and at the end of the day, the customer will pay for it. So we also need to be careful with regulation that further only drive cost up. So overall I agree, but sometimes you also not get overboard and have a kind of standardization or a certain time frame which makes it still economical for players to continue to develop, because otherwise indeed it's going to be coming down to a small oligopoly of suppliers who's going to charge mega prices for the charging equipment. So there is a bit of a balance there, I think, as well, in terms of how to develop standardization that will still keep it safe but yet affordable for consumers.
We're going to stop here. If you have more questions, they can continue downstairs on the first floor, where there will be drinks. Big thank you to our board members for the discussion. And yeah, let's go to drinks.